What's good, everybody? It's Robo back with another video, and today I've got my college football Week 12 picks. We've got over 50 FBS matchups this week, and I'm going over almost every single one of them as usual. There are some great matchups this week, but before I get into everything, let me go ahead and recap the Week 11 results. Week 11 was alright picks-wise. I had a great week picking winners, but against the spread, I was just under 500 overall after a rough start to the week for me. But some pretty close score predictions and a strong Saturday overall helped out, so heading into Week 12, we're again in a decent spot up on the year. So without further ado, let's get into this week's picks and get started in order of kickoff time as usual. Another week of action kicks off with Ball State at Buffalo. Ball State playing much better football as of late, but still with a 3-6 record. Last week, a crazy punter pick six kept him in the game enough to cover at home against Miami, Ohio. Buffalo's coming off a road win over Akron themselves and hasn't been home in nearly a month now. Both of these defenses have given up a ton of points this season, with Ball State being the worst of the two. And along with that, Buffalo still has some hopes to reach the MAC title game. So with home field advantage, I think they'll come out on top this week, 34-27. Next is Bowling Green and Western Michigan. Western took their first loss of conference play last week at home to NIU, a game they definitely could have had without a few key mistakes. But hopes are still alive as both these teams are in a four-way tie for first in the conference at 4-1. This one comes down to Western Michigan's defense being able to get some stops though. They've got the best offense in the MAC, but are giving up well over 400 yards and 30 points a game this season. Bowling Green's pretty evened out on both sides of the ball, so not a real juggernaut, but they've got guys who can light up this defense in Stewart and Fannin. I think this one ends up tight, but give me Bowling Green at home, 30-24. Lastly on Tuesday, we've got Central Michigan at Toledo. A game, personally, I don't expect to be that close. Central's on their third and fourth string quarterbacks due to injuries and have put up just 20 points over the last 2 weeks combined with zero resemblance of a pass offense. Toledo is at home here late in the year, only a game back in the MAC standings. I think they'll come to play and handle the Central team, taking advantage of everything they're out, 31-13. Miami, Ohio, and Kent State may be a match between the MAC's best and worst teams. Kent State's still sitting on winless now at 0-9, and Miami, Ohio on a 4-game winning streak with a lone conference loss on the road at Toledo. And this game probably should be by over at halftime if we're being real. Kent State's defense has given up well over 500 yards a game, and Miami, Ohio has just been dominant lately and survived a mini scare from Ball State last week. But this spread's up above 30, and I could easily see Miami sitting starters to avoid injury if they're up by enough in the second half. I think Kent State will end up covering here despite getting handled, 38-10. Northern Illinois takes on Akron in a somewhat similar matchup as the last one, with one of the MAC's best against one of the worst. But record-wise, this NIU team does not look the way they've played at all. 2-3 in the conference despite statistically being the second best offense and number one defense. And although Akron is definitely one of the bottom feeders in the conference, they've genuinely competed 4 games in a row now. NIU on the road is going to be real tough, but I think they've shown they can compete, and NIU has struggled to take care of games. I think the Huskies win by just 2 scores, 31-17. The last game of Week 12 action is Eastern Michigan at Ohio. Ohio has looked really good besides the Miami, Ohio loss. Sitting at 4-1 in conference play, tied for first, and Eastern has kind of fallen apart, dropping 3 of the last 4. But a really competitive loss falling to Toledo last week on a failed 2-point conversion. I definitely still think Eastern's a competitive team in the MAC when they want to be, and with bowl game hopes at stake now after back-to-back losses, I don't see why they wouldn't show up to play in this one. Ohio's offense is just rolling way too much for me to not take them to win at home though. Give me Ohio by a score of 30-24. Just one standalone Thursday game this week with East Carolina heading out to Tulsa. ECU's on an absolute roll the past few weeks with Caden Hauser taking the reins of the offense. 650 yards and 11 touchdowns from Hauser the past 2 games against FIU and Temple. And this Tulsa team has looked nearly just as bad as those squads this season, even dropping their matchup against Temple earlier this season. Last time out, they gave up 59 to UAB, and I could easily see this East Carolina offense putting up another clinic. I'm taking ECU to keep it up on the road this time, 38-20. On to Friday, we've got 4, starting with a border war with Wyoming at Colorado State. This one's a lot more interesting now than a few weeks ago, as Wyoming got Harrison Whaley back last game, and he absolutely dominated New Mexico. He really changes the landscape of this offense, and I think could actually give him a shot here. But Colorado State is on fire, winning 4 straight and sitting in position to head to the Mountain West Championship right now. And we've only seen 1 strong day of offense from the Cowboys this season. I think the Rams are a lot more trustworthy right now, and I'm going to take them by 2 scores, 34-20. Next is North Texas at UTSA, with the Mean Green looking for a much better day this week than last, as Army completely shut down the offense, holding them to just 3 points, and was honestly a winnable game for them, as they held Army to just 14 themselves. I was really shocked at how different things looked, as usually North Texas games are full of offense, and this one will probably end up going that way, getting back to high-pace, dominant offense, and struggling defense type of play. UTSA has been really good at home this season, going 4-0 with a win over Memphis, and now just needs to win the next 2 to reach bowl eligibility. I think that's too much to ignore here, and UTSA takes care of home field yet again, 38-31. On to a West Coast Big Ten matchup, UCLA at Washington. UCLA comes into this one on fire, winning 3 straight now, including 2 on the road and a home win over Iowa. This team has really flipped a switch and turned the tide on the season after a horrendous start, and now face a Washington team who's lost 3 of their last 4 games, but all 3 of those have come on the road, and they still have not lost in Husky Stadium since 2021. Coach Fish has announced Will Rogers will remain quarterback 1 this week despite being taken out of the Penn State loss. I don't disagree with that choice and think Washington's look good enough at home to think they'll play a solid game this week. And even with UCLA on a roll, I just can't fade Washington at home here. I've got them taking it close, 27-23. The final weekday matchup comes with late night Big 12 action with Houston traveling to Arizona. This Houston team has really found its groove lately, winning 3 out of 4 against TCU, Utah, and Kansas State. And considering how long Arizona's slides lasted and how bad some of the results have been, it's really easy to say Houston should continue winning here. On paper, Arizona definitely has some elite talent and would win this game, but the performance hasn't come close to matching that this season, and they'll have to win out to reach bowl eligibility. I just have way more faith in Houston being able to reach that goal considering their play late in this season rather than Arizona. So give me the Cougs on the road straight up, 20-17. We'll start Saturday off with number 2 Ohio State on the road this week at Northwestern. And to keep it simple, I expect nothing really different from last week's game against Purdue. Complete dominance on both sides of the ball leading to a big blowout win. They absolutely could pitch another shutout, but on the road I think they'll give up some points here to Northwestern. But I just think the talent gap is way too big here to not see the Buckeyes score several touchdowns in this game. I like them big here heading into next week's Indiana matchup, 42-6. Next is Texas going on the road at Arkansas, which could potentially be a sneaky tough game for the Horns. Arkansas already took down Tennessee at home and kept it tight with A&M earlier this year, but at the same time are coming off a blowout loss to Ole Miss where they gave up 63 points a couple weeks ago, and the defense is just completely unraveled for 3 straight games. Texas is coming in hot, dropping 49 on Florida last week, and I really just don't see Arkansas's defense slowing them down enough to cover here, especially with Sark taking this one personally. Give me the Horns, 34-17. Clemson and Pitt face off this week with a bit less hype than I anticipated a few weeks ago, with Clemson dropping a game to Louisville and Pitt now losing back-to-back weeks to SMU and Virginia. Things have really unfolded for Eli Holstein lately, being taken out of both losses for Nate Yarnell, and last week was real ugly for Yarnell as well, as Virginia just dominated defensively. I'm assuming they'll go back to Holstein with how he played in the first 7 games of the season and hope for some better play, as they'll definitely need it. Clemson locked back in last week and took down Virginia Tech on the road, so they'll be focused on this one as well. I think we see a better Pitt team this week, but Clemson's defense comes to play, and they're just too much for the Panthers, 31-24. Continuing on with ranked teams, we've got Colorado taking on Utah. The Buffs are still rolling, taking pretty good care of Texas Tech last week to keep their goals in front of them. And Utah really surprised me with a near upset win over BYU thanks to the offense coming alive in the first half in that one. Brandon Rose had a great half, but the entire offense got shut down in the second, which allowed the BYU comeback. And I still think that's more like the real Utah team we've gotten this season, and probably the one that shows up to Boulder as well. I think the defense will be able to keep them in the game, but I just can't expect enough out of Rose to give them a real shot at an upset here. I like Colorado in a bit of a lower scoring game than compared to their standard, 27-20. Liberty's on the road this week at UMass, another absolute cupcake game on the Liberty schedule this season. They handled business last week for me, making easy work of Middle Tennessee, and this UMass team is generally performing around the same level, but they do get this one at home. Prior to the Middle Tennessee road win, Liberty on the road this year had lost to Kennesaw State and nearly lost to Mexico State, so another upset alert could be warranted here. But I think Liberty has enough offense to just outlast this UMass team this week. I've got them taking this one, 38-21. Staying in the Conference USA, next is Louisiana Tech at Western Kentucky. Louisiana Tech's offense exploded last week as they were a play away from knocking off Jacksonville State. Evan Bullock was lights out throughout the air, and they should have pulled that one off at home. But now they have to refocus after the loss and hit the road against a surging Western Kentucky team with 4 straight wins and all by solid margins. The competition has been easy though, but aside from last week, the Bulldogs look like they're in a similar boat as the rest. I don't really expect the offense to have nearly the same success against this Hilltopper secondary, especially on the road, so I'm going to take Western Kentucky here again, 35-20. Now over to the American, we've got a great matchup with Tulane at Navy. Navy passed with flying covers last week on the road at South Florida, just dominating that game, forcing 3 turnovers and controlling the clock with a consistent rush attack. This week will be another really tough test though, as Tulane's coming in on fire at 8-2 now with some huge blowouts in recent weeks. When up against genuine competition though, they've been in battles and have passed in conference so far to this point, but Navy may be the best yet besides the non-conference games. I think there's real upset potential here, but with how well the Green Wave have played on both sides of the ball and showing in the past they can handle the adversity, I like them to escape this one by a field goal, 31-28. Auburn kicks off SEC Cupcake Week with Louisiana Monroe coming to town, and the Tigers learned last year not to take these games lightly as Diego Pavia and New Mexico State came in and beat them in Jordan-Hare. This doesn't seem nearly like the same situation though. A bit better Auburn defense to me and a much lesser UL Monroe team despite a positive record. It's been 3 straight losses now for the Warhawks, including a 21-point loss to Texas State last week. There's also a genuine chance this is the last one of the season for Auburn, so I could see them wanting to put on a show. I think Jarquez Hunter runs all over this defense, and no matter who's at quarterback for the Tigers, they have a successful enough day to win comfortably. I've got Auburn 41-10. Marshall hosts Coastal Carolina this week with both teams coming off wins. Coastal taking on App State at home and Marshall throttling a bad Southern Miss team on the road. At home this season, Marshall's undefeated at this point, but with a couple pretty close games in ULM and Western Michigan. And for Coastal on the road this year, they look great early on, but their last 2 were blowout losses to James Madison and Troy. It's clear to me they need to be able to establish the run to have any chance, as in those games they struggled to do so. Marshall's given up almost 180 yards a game on the ground this season, so this could end up being a game where Coastal hangs around with that run game. I think this spread being up over a touchdown is well worth looking at the way Coastal ran it last week, but give me Marshall to win this game though, 34-28. I really don't know what happened to Jacksonville State's defense last week, as although it hasn't been great all year, I did not expect them to need a Hail Mary to force overtime with Louisiana Tech. This week will probably be a much different story though, back at home against FIU. I don't really think this FIU team is terrible per se, but offensively they've been bad outside of the Eric Rivers explosion against New Mexico State 2 weeks ago. If the Jack State pass D plays like they did last week, FIU could definitely hang around here, but I don't think they'll be able to slow down the run enough for it to matter much. I like Jacksonville State to get back to blowout wins this week, 38-17. Now on to the Owl Off, the FAU Owls at the Temple Owls, a matchup of 2-2-7 teams who have really struggled lately, but maybe FAU more so, giving up 30 straight points to South Florida and then 49 to East Carolina last week in embarrassing fashion. Temple had a similar result with the ECU, but showed up offensively at least, and then last week had to play Tulane on the road. It's been a nightmare season for both of these teams still though, but now Cam Fancher's out for FAU. This makes me feel even worse about that offense right now, despite a somewhat decent outing from Wiseman last week. I just think we've started to see a bit of a gap between these teams offensively, so with that, I like Temple to take this one at home, 31-23. Illinois takes on Michigan State this week after their bye, looking to put back-to-back losses in the rearview mirror. Oregon was expected, but Minnesota is one they definitely could have had at home. So now we'll see if they're able to get back on track against a bad but sneaky Michigan State team. The Spartans beat Iowa at home earlier this year and competed with Michigan, but have also lost in some ugly fashion and now have a pretty banged up Aiden Childs at quarterback. He's good to go it seems, but we'll see if there's any limitations there. As for Illinois, they should be getting a few key defensive pieces back this week to help out in a big way. And from a matchup perspective, I just think this is a game where Luke Altmaier could settle in and control if he really needs to. I'm going to take Illinois at home this week, 27-20. Cal hosts Syracuse this week with some momentum building after a huge win over Oregon State was followed up by a road win at Wake Forest last week. Now 5-4, the Bull hopes are well alive, and Syracuse comes to town across the country with a pretty awful defense. One Mendoza could really pick apart, the same way he did the last 2 weeks. McCord can absolutely sling it, and I really love what Fran Brown is building at Syracuse, but I just cannot get behind this Cuse defense on the road this week, especially if Jaden Ott is feeling it. Give me Cal by 10, 34-24. Sam Houston is back from the bye week on the road taking on Kennesaw State, who generally has looked competitive 4 games in a row now, but despite getting that program up to the FBS level, they just fired the head coach due to a 1-8 start to their first ever FBS season. A bit of a shock to me, but we'll have to see what the effects of that will be on this team, and for how they've been playing, I would definitely expect another competitive fight, especially considering how poor the Sam Houston offense has been lately. But now Hunter Watson should be plenty rested and a little bit more healthy. Defensively, Sam Houston's been incredible, so I'm expecting a fairly low-scoring game here as Kennesaw hosts this one. I just like the Bearcats on the road by 10, 24-14. Hawaii's on the road this week playing some really solid football lately and looking to continue that against 2-7 Utah State. The Aggies have a great offense but are an absolute disaster defensively, which should probably lead to another huge day from Hawaii's offense. As of late, they nearly upset UNLV last week after back-to-back wins over Nevada and Fresno State, and they've shown up on the road recently as well, giving me some confidence heading into this one as both the better performing team and able to travel. I like Hawaii to continue their run here, 35-27. Over to the Big Ten is Purdue and yet another ugly matchup, this time at home against Penn State as over 4 touchdown underdogs. As always, there's a genuinely real chance that's not enough points as Purdue is just flat out bad this season, maybe the worst in the Power 5 so far. Coming off a shutout at Ohio State, we'll see if the offense can put up some points this week. They got in field goal range a few times and just missed them, so I think they'll be a bit better at home against Penn State here. But I think it ends in fairly similar fashion, just a bit closer. Give me Penn State 38-13. Up next at 3:30 Eastern is Virginia at Notre Dame. This Virginia team really turned a page last week on the road at Pitt, taking away the Panther offense completely, ending a 3-game skid and putting Bull hopes back on the line. This week will be much tougher though, as Notre Dame comes into this one absolutely rolling. 4 straight blowout wins over Stanford, Georgia Tech, Navy, and Florida State. Obviously no notable teams really, considering Tech was missing King and the rest didn't stand much of a chance, but still impressive to say the least. Riley Leonard's been dominant, but I think Virginia's defense can make things a bit tougher if they play how they did last week. And if they're able to do so, I think they can cover the spread up over 3 touchdowns. Give me Notre Dame though, 35-17. SMU is back in action this week after the bye, still on a tear as their last time out was a throttling of Pitt. The offense got back to dominance with Kevin Jennings and Brashard Smith carrying the load. Matthew Hibner has really stepped up in RJ Maryland's absence, and the offense could be adding Jake Bailey back into the mix as well. Boston College is going to be in for a rough go if they can't generate takeaways this week, and although they beat Syracuse last week, I just doubt they'll be able to replicate a 300-yard rushing performance with zero passing ability with Grayson James against this SMU defense. It's not a super stout group, but it's definitely not Syracuse. I like SMU to keep the perfect ACC season alive with a 41-21 win over Boston College. LSU's on the road this week at Florida, who will be hoping to get DJ Lagway back as their second half against Georgia and full game against Texas went about as bad as it could ever go, just completely collapsing on both sides of the ball, looking pretty uninspired. Maybe a confidence issue with not having your quarterback out there, but also Florida's been pretty up and down all year on both sides of the ball. LSU's coming off back-to-back blowout losses as well, though, falling to A&M and Alabama, getting gashed on the ground and unable to stop the mobile quarterbacks. I think this game is really dependent on if Lagway can play or not, but assuming he does go, I like Florida's chances at the upset here in Gainesville. He brings a different energy out of this team, and LSU is really struggling right now. I'll take the Gators close, 31-28. Louisville's back off the bye with their last game being the upset win over Clemson in Death Valley. A huge win I really wasn't expecting, but now makes this Louisville team season look a lot better overall and back in the rankings. This week they'll travel across the country to Stanford, and usually this type of games will be a hangover territory, potential upset watch, but this Stanford team has gotten demolished week in and week out, with the exception of Wake Forest, who just flat out is not a tough opponent. The schedule's been rough for Stanford, but even NC State hung 59 on them a few weeks ago. I expect Louisville to control this game from start to finish and pick up win number 7 here, 41-17. Oregon State's season went from bad to worse last week, dropping a home game to San Jose State. Anthony Hankerson is really the only positive of the entire Beaver offense right now. Ben Gulbranson was okay, but he turned it over still and got nothing going on the board. Air Force's defense has been looking really solid against the run lately as well. They completely dominated Fresno's rush attack last week, and the offense put up some points again. Maybe that run game's finally starting to click. If that continues, they can win this game against a really struggling Oregon State team. The Beaver defense has done well against the run since the Nevada game, but they haven't seen a rush-heavy offense like Air Force since that game, and could definitely get gashed again here. I like Air Force's chances at home. I'll take them 27-24. South Florida at Charlotte is up next. For the Bulls last week, Bryce Archie in the offense just didn't have it against Navy. He got completely shut down until late and held just 7 points on the day. A much different outing than the week prior where he dominated FAU. Charlotte may be 3-6 and coming off 3 losses, but all 3 were to great teams in Navy, Memphis, and Tulane, and now they've had a bye week to regroup and try to get back in the win column. The quarterback play for Charlotte gives some obvious pause, but I think they'll find a little more success this week against one of the worst defenses in American Conference. So give me the Charlotte as a home underdog this week, 30-27. USC made news last week with the decision to bench Miller Moss over the bye and start Jaden Maiava. That decision comes amidst the Trojans dropping 4 of their last 5 games, including a couple ugly games out of Miller Moss. Maiava hasn't played much at all this season, but now gets his chance to take the job. Last season as a freshman, he was great for UNLV, throwing for over 3,000 yards and 17 touchdowns, and rushing for nearly 300 more yards. His first Big Ten test will be Nebraska this week at home, a team who's obviously made some big games interesting, but has also taken some ugly losses as well. Raiola's status is important here, though, as he's questionable for now, but regardless, this game could be tough to read, as Nebraska switched to a new play caller as well. The recent hire Dana Holgerson will be at the helm, so we'll see how that goes with a brand new guy there. But with so much up in the air for this game between new coaches, new quarterbacks, and injury news, I think it ends up a close one Saturday, but USC takes it at home in Maiava's first start, 31-24. West Virginia went into Cincinnati last week and found a way to win with 3 big takeaways, including 2 for touchdown returns and 17 points off turnovers in total. So despite an ugly day of offense, they got a solid win on the road. This week they're back home against Baylor, and depending on if they can get anything out of the offense, I think this could be a slightly favorable matchup for the Mountaineers. Baylor's given up a ton of points in conference play despite being on this 3-game win streak, and as an offense, they tend to be a run-heavy team, which is a strength of this West Virginia defense. Back-to-back wins on the road has given this season some new life, with bowl eligibility 1 win away, and I think they'll get it done, ending Baylor's 3-game stretch with a close win at home, 30-28 as underdogs. Troy and Georgia Southern face off this week, both coming off of bye weeks. Georgia Southern picked up a huge comfort-behind win at South Alabama last time out, scoring 21 straight in the 4th to steal that game. And Troy also is coming off a win, taking down Coastal Carolina at home, a big turn from how they've played in basically every other game this season. We'll see if that continues coming out of this bye week, as it's definitely possible considering how bad Georgia Southern's defense has been this season. But Troy on the road is still winless and has only been real competitive once against Arkansas State. They'll have to prove it to me that they can keep this within a score on the road. I like Georgia Southern by 14, 38-24. James Madison at Old Dominion's a tough one to pick this week. Old Dominion fighting for bowl eligibility now with their backs against the wall at 4-5, and James Madison looking to keep their hopes alive, needing some help to get back to the Sun Belt title. As the spread would indicate, this Dukes team has been better pretty much all around than Old Dominion, but at the same time, their performance on the road lately has been flat out awful. They lost at Louisiana Monroe, and the very next road game dropped one to Georgia Southern. They got absolutely zero offense in either loss and just look so much better at home in conference. Old Dominion's been somewhat of the same, taking down some really good teams at home so far this year. With both of those trends aligning, it's pretty hard to ignore it, so I'm rocking with Old Dominion as a home dog here, 28-24 outright. South Carolina hosts Missouri this week after both teams picked up strong wins in Week 11. South Carolina taking easy care of a hot Vandy squad, and Missouri taking down Oklahoma in the final moments with an incredible final drive and then a scoop and score touchdown in the last minute. This game's going to be a lot tougher, though, having to play a streaky South Carolina squad on the road, so in my opinion, Brady Cook's status looms large. Although I would agree Drew Pine wasn't nearly as bad as expected last week and maybe performed even better than most of Cook's season, I still think Cook is their guy, and without him on the road against a team playing as well as South Carolina is, this is not a great spot. So in my opinion, if Cook plays, I like their chance of keeping it competitive and maybe even having a chance to win it, but regardless of his status, I'm going to take South Carolina to win this one, 27-17. Georgia State finally gets a chance to put the big losing streak to bed this week, taking on an Arkansas State team that's definitely beatable. Although they sit at 5-4, this defense has given up a bunch of points to some really bad teams this season like Southern Miss and Troy, and they're coming off a 40-point loss to Louisiana last week. Georgia State's lost 6 games in a row now, but it hasn't been back at home field since the beginning of October. Bowl hopes are already out of the window, and now they'll be playing for pride in the future. But I think the boost of being back in their own building for the first time in 5 games is going to be a big help. Aside from James Madison, it's not like this team is getting blown out every week. They've actually been better statistically than Arkansas State this season despite the record. So give me Georgia State at home finally, 34-30. Rutgers at Maryland's another real tough game to pick this week, mostly due to how much better Rutgers played last week at home against a solid Minnesota team. After a 4-game losing streak, they came out and forced some huge takeaways near the goal line for easy scores to take that game, and did so without star running back Kyle Monangai as well, who they should be getting back this week on the road. Maryland, on the other hand, has generally competed with Oregon, avoiding the major blowout on the road, falling by just 21. But now, after losing 4 of their last 5, they absolutely have to win this game to have a shot at a bowl game, with Iowa and Penn State coming up. Rutgers may have a little less energy in that department, and obviously Ethan Kaliakmanis had the revenge narrative last week. I just don't expect to see the same performance from him on the road this week, and they're really going to need Monangai. I'm going to go with Maryland to win and cover with what's at stake, 31-24. Boise State's on the road this week at San Jose State, a game that, based on last week, could definitely end up being closer than Boise wants it to be. They really struggled to put Nevada away a week ago, taking that one by just 7, even though they never trailed. Ashton Genty was incredible as always, but Nevada did not let Maddox Madsen throw all over them like some other teams did. San Jose State's had an up and down year offensively, but sits at 6-3 right now, and is coming off a great road win at Oregon State, where Walker Eget threw for nearly 400 yards. Nick Nash and Justin Lockhart are serious weapons and could give them a real shot to hang with Boise this week, but Boise's defense should be able to do a much better job here and limit San Jose State enough to walk out with a nice win. I'm going 35-23 Boise. We've got a big one in the Big 12 Saturday night between Arizona State and Kansas State. The winner keeps their Big 12 hopes alive, and the loser picks up their 3rd conference loss of the season. The big news to track this week will be Cam Scadaboo's status. The Sun Devils won last week against UCF without him, but it'll be a much harder task this week on the road if he can't go. But as of right now, I'd assume he'll end up playing with the size of this game. As I said, he's a huge part of their offense, and they just squeaked by last week without him. They actually got severely outgained in that game, but a punt return touchdown and a pick 6 helped keep them ahead until the offense came alive late. Kansas State's coming off a road loss at Houston 2 weeks ago and had the bye to address their struggles in the past 2 matchups. So I like them to bounce back with a win here, but if Scadaboo plays, it could be a dogfight. I'll go 31-27 Wildcats. Moving over to the Sun Belt, we've got a solid matchup with South Alabama heading over to top dog Louisiana, still undefeated in conference play. Last week was an impressive one for the Raging Cajuns, dropping 55 on Arkansas State, so South Alabama's going to have their hands full with this team on the road. Their offense has come back alive, but what a defensive collapse it was last time out for the Jaguars, giving up 21 straight to Georgia Southern to blow that game and put a huge wrench in their bowl hopes. At 4-5 now, they'll have to upset either this Louisiana team or Texas State in the season finale, assuming they take down Southern Miss next week for a 5th win. I definitely think the offense will come to play, but Louisiana's defense is number 2 in the conference for a reason. I just don't see the Jags having enough on the road to outmatch this team. I'm taking Louisiana again, 34-24. Another Sun Belt matchup is next, but a much less fun one with Texas State hosting Southern Miss. And this Southern Miss team has just been flat out terrible. Now 1-8 on the year and dropping last week's game at home to Marshall 37-3. There's really no reason for Texas State to allow this to be a game at all. The spread shows that before you even get into any specifics, but the Bobcats finally snapped out of their funk last week, dominating Louisiana Monroe on the road. And now back home against a severely underwhelming opponent can really put on a show if they play a similar brand of football. I just think this one's going to be over pretty quick, so give me Texas State big, 45-14. Now on to the big night slate games. Number 1 Oregon on the road at Wisconsin this week. And despite some preseason expectations for this game to be a great one, it looks a lot less fun now after seeing Wisconsin's last few games. They're coming off a bye week, but an ugly blowout loss to Iowa and a 15-point loss to Penn State at home are the last 2 ones for this team. And Oregon's simply a much tougher matchup than either of those 2 teams were. The Ducks have shown up on the road this season as well, going 4-0 with none being particularly close games. This team has a clear path to an undefeated season, and I don't think Wisconsin has enough offense to keep up with the Ducks here. I like Oregon, potentially big. I'm going to go 31-14 for a final. Now on to the game of the week, Tennessee at Georgia. A loss here from Georgia would completely eliminate them from the playoff picture as well as in the SEC. So this is a must-win game for the Dogs, coming off that road loss to Ole Miss. The offense just has not been good whatsoever, specifically Carson Beck's play this season. Even in the Texas win, he threw 3 interceptions, and on the year he now has thrown 12. Nico Iamaleava should be able to play in this one, which is huge for Tennessee's chances, but we'll see how limited he is with that injury he suffered last week. Regardless, I think that Dylan Sampson's going to be the offensive game plan for the Vols, and Georgia's going to have to focus on slowing him down to help the offensive problems not matter as much again. At home, with everything on the line, I do think Georgia's defense shows up and slows Sampson enough down to win it, but I think Tennessee's defense does keep it close. I'm going 27-20 Georgia. Next is another SEC cupcake matchup, this time A&M hosting New Mexico State. Last year, New Mexico State went into Jordan Hare and beat Auburn, but this is a much different New Mexico State team. No Diego Pavia, and one of the worst run defenses in all of FBS. They just don't really have much of a chance in this game. Obviously, the spread indicates that, and nearly 40 points is absolutely coverable. But with a mismatch of A&M's rush offense on top of just how bad that defense defended it, I see A&M's defense dominating as well, leading them to a 48-3 win over the other Aggies from New Mexico State. Next is Cincinnati at Iowa State, with both of these teams on 2-game losing streaks after really promising starts of the year. Turnovers were the issue last week for Cincinnati, but the offense didn't really do much themselves. And for Iowa State, the defense got absolutely mauled by the Jayhawks last week on the road. On the outside looking in now in the Big 12, they cannot drop another game and need some help to make the title. I think with both these teams playing through rough patches right now, we could see some more struggles from both sides in this game. But I do think Iowa State is the better of these 2 teams on top of being at home. If Cincinnati's offense comes back alive, especially Brendan Sorsby, they'll have a chance to be in this game until the end though. So give me Iowa State by within 1 score, 30-24. Over to the ACC, we've got North Carolina hosting Wake Forest at 8 Eastern. A game North Carolina should be able to win to reach bowl eligibility. Back-to-back road wins and put them in great position to do so here against just a Wake Forest team that hasn't been able to slow down anyone defensively. And this will be probably no different as North Carolina's found its offense. 34-plus points in 3 straight games now coming off a bye. Omarion Hampton should be able to control this game from start to finish, and even the passing game could see some success this week. I can see Wake competing in this game, though, with the way they've played offensively, and they're definitely a solid road team, winning 3 straight away from home. I just don't see them slowing Hampton down enough at all to win this one. Give me North Carolina, 34-27. Memphis and UAB face off this week in the battle for the Bones, with Memphis coming in as decent home favorites at 14 for this one, and for good reason as UAB now sits at 2-7 after the home loss to UConn last week, blowing a 17-point lead in the second half to drop that one. Memphis has had their struggles as well, but still sits 8-2 despite having a really small chance at reaching the American title game with 2 undefeated still at large in the conference. But the offense wasn't great last week, and they still handled Rice despite the score being a bit closer. Seth Hennigan couldn't get much through the air, so Mario Anderson carried the load on the ground. That Rice pass defense has just been playing much better football as of late than UAB, though, and I don't think we'll see Hennigan struggle as much, especially here on senior night. I think Memphis really comes alive again and takes this one by nearly 3 scores, 38-20. Next is Washington State at New Mexico. Maybe a sneaky upset pick for some, as New Mexico's offense has been really good almost all season long with Devin Dampier's ability as a runner. They're fresh off a road win against San Diego State, and now face a Washington State defense that's given up some big plays this season. The issue with this matchup for me, though, is with the defense, still giving up way too much against bad teams despite slowing down San Diego last week. And this Cougar offense is one of the best in the country statistically. I don't think they see nearly the same success in this game, as it's just not a good matchup at all defensively. Any shot New Mexico State will have in this one will come with takeaways and a dominant performance from Dampier, and while possible, I just don't think they'll be able to do it. I've got Washington State by over 2 scores, 45-28. Now to the late night on the West Coast, undefeated BYU hosting Kansas in a really interesting game in my opinion. BYU continues to escape, as last week they definitely could have and maybe should have lost to Utah, but time and time again they find a way to win and still sit in the top 10 in the country right now. But Kansas comes to town playing by far their best football of the season, taking down Iowa State last week and nearly upsetting Kansas State on the road the game prior. I definitely think they've got a real shot on the road here if Daniels and Neal are playing the way they have lately. It's just a matter of trusting BYU until they prove to not be trustworthy. At home, at night, with an undefeated season on the line, I gotta take BYU to escape this one close again. I'm going 31-27 BYU. The final game of Week 12 is San Diego State at UNLV with another big spread up around 3 touchdowns. And definitely coverable for UNLV in my opinion, as that offense is good enough to score on anyone in the Mountain West, and San Diego State will be one of the worst offenses they've seen this season. Just 16 points at home against a defense as bad as Mexico State's gives me pretty much no faith they'll be able to hang on the road with UNLV here. The Rebels are 7-2 with the lone losses coming to Boise State and Syracuse. I think they take this game in blowout fashion, 41-17. That's it for my Week 12 picks. Let me know your thoughts, upset predictions, and which games you're most excited to watch this week down in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.